Valentine's Day is supposed to be safe. It's a night built on soft lighting and familiar rituals, reservations made weeks in advance, wine poured carefully, promises exchanged across small tables. It's the one evening of the year where being alone feels like failure, and being chosen feels like protection. But some people understand something darker about nights like this. They know romance lowers defenses. They know crowds create cover. They know no one questions why someone went out on a date and never came home. Tonight's story is about a man who believed he had perfected that knowledge. Once a year, on Valentine's Day, he chose a woman who trusted him. He offered her charm, patience, and a beautiful evening. And then he turned romance into a trap. For years he won, until the night he chose the wrong woman. This is the Heartbreak King. The Heartbreak King, a Madness and Macabre. Valentine's Day, story. Valentine's Day is a liar. It dresses itself in softness, roses wrapped in cellophane, candlelight diffused through glass, menus written in cursive fonts, meant to suggest intimacy. It tells people the night is about love, about being chosen, about connection. But underneath the perfume and poetry, Valentine's Day is about something far more dangerous. Selection. Every year, on the same night, people step into restaurants, cars, hotel rooms, and strangers' lives believing they have been chosen safely, that the person across from them is who they appear to be, that the atmosphere itself is protection. Most of them are right, some of them are wrong, and the ones who are wrong never know it at the beginning. They always say later that nothing felt off at first. Violet Wren didn't believe in fate. She believed in patterns. Patterns were honest. Patterns didn't hide behind coincidence or romance or destiny. Patterns repeated whether people wanted them to or not. At 4:12 p.m. on February 14th, Violet stood in line at a grocery store watching a man debate between two nearly identical boxes of heart-shaped chocolates. His partner stood beside him, pretending not to care. Violet cared enough for all three of them. Her basket held practical things: eggs, coffee, oranges, and a frozen dinner she'd already decided she would eat standing up in her kitchen. It wasn't loneliness that had shaped her choices. It was efficiency. Loneliness implied longing. Violet had learned not to indulge longing without structure. Her phone vibrated in her hand. She didn't look at it immediately. She already knew. When she did, the message was waiting exactly as she'd expected. Adrien, 7:30, Le Jardin Rouge. No pressure. We can reschedule if tonight feels like too much. 5 days. That was how long they'd been talking. 5 days of measured conversation. Adrien didn't flood her phone with attention. He didn't send good morning texts or late night confessions. He didn't press for intimacy or reassurance. He waited. That alone made Violet cautious. Predators who announce themselves are easy to spot. The dangerous ones learn patience. Violet had rules now, not because she was afraid, but because rules revealed intent. She always met in public. She always drove herself. She always told someone where she was going. She never left her drink unattended, and she never let charm accelerate intimacy. Adrien hadn't challenged a single one. He'd acknowledged them, respected them, built around them. That was what unsettled her. Valentine's Day meant crowds, noise, witnesses, light, safe, her rational mind told her. But something quieter stayed alert, a tension beneath her ribs that suggested tonight mattered more than it should. She typed carefully. Violet, 7:30 works. I'm driving myself, and I won't leave my drink unattended. The response came quickly. Adrien, Good. Boundaries make the night feel earned. Violet stared at the word earned until it lost meaning. It wasn't wrong. It was revealing. She paid for her groceries and stepped into the cold, breath blooming white in the air. Before getting into her car, she texted her sister. Violet, date tonight. If I disappear, tell Netflix I deserve a limited series. Her sister replied with a joke and a reminder to share her location. Violet did. She always did. Le Jardin Rouge glowed like a practiced lie. Velvet curtains framed the windows, candlelight spilling onto wet pavement. Couples clustered outside, laughing slightly too loudly, leaning into one another like proximity alone could prove happiness. Violet arrived 10 minutes early. Early meant control. Inside, warmth wrapped around her, butter, wine, roses just past their prime. The hostess smiled when Violet gave her name. He's already here. Of course he was. Adrian stood near the bar, relaxed, hands loose at his sides. He wasn't on his phone. He wasn't scanning the room. He was waiting. When he saw Violet, his expression changed. Not dramatically, just enough to register recognition. Like he'd been expecting her, specifically, not just a date. Violet, he said. Hearing her name from his mouth felt intimate in a way she didn't like. Adrian. He didn't touch her, didn't crowd her space, didn't rush the moment. That restraint felt deliberate. I'm glad you came, he said. I'm still deciding if that was brave or stupid, Violet replied. Adrian smiled softly. Those are usually the same thing. A server approached with a tray, 2 glasses of red wine already poured. Violet didn't reach for hers. Could I have mine poured at the table? She asked calmly. The server hesitated, glanced at Adrian. He didn't object. Of course, the server said. Adrian tilted his head slightly. That's a firm boundary. It is. For less than a second, a flicker Violet almost missed. Something passed behind his eyes. Then it was gone. I respect that, he said. It's smart. They were seated at a table partially screened from the room. Violet noted exits, cameras, staff proximity, habit. The wine was poured in front of her. She waited. Then she took a sip. It was excellent, smooth, dark, sweet enough to linger longer than it should have. Dinner unfolded easily, too easily. Adrian asked thoughtful questions. He listened. He laughed quietly at the right moments. He spoke about old places, quiet nights, being alone, never as a complaint, always as a fact. When Violet asked what he did for work, he smiled. Consulting. That's vague. It keeps me interesting. She laughed. She shouldn't have. Dessert arrived. A chocolate tart shaped like a heart, dusted in powdered sugar like a lie. Adrian watched her take a bite, not appreciatively, precisely. How are you feeling? He asked. Fine, Violet said. Why? Just curious. The sweetness clung to her tongue. Underneath it, something bitter crept in. Her limbs felt heavy. I need the bathroom, Violet said abruptly. Adrian rose halfway, then stopped when she lifted a hand. I'll be right back. Of course, he said gently. Take your time. The walk felt delayed. Inside the bathroom, Violet gripped the sink and stared at herself, pupils wide, mouth dry. Her phone slipped from her fingers as she tried to unlock it, clattering against tile. Someone knocked. Violet? Adrian's voice, soft, concerned. Her stomach dropped. She tried to answer. Nothing came. The room tilted, the light smeared, and as the world folded inward, Violet had one clear, horrifying thought. This is why he waited. Cold came first, not gently, not gradually. It arrived like punishment, sharp and invasive, needling through Violet's clothes, as if the night itself had decided to wake her by force. She inhaled and choked. Her throat burned. Her mouth tasted wrong, metallic, chemical, sweet in a way that made her stomach lurch. Her tongue felt too thick, her jaw heavy, like her body had been rearranged while she wasn't looking. Violet tried to move. Pain answered. Her wrists were behind her back, tight, unforgiving. Plastic bit into skin, zip ties. That realization cut through the fog faster than fear ever could. No rope, no knots, no hesitation. Deliberate, fast, disposable. Her heart slammed hard enough to make her dizzy. Violet forced her eyes open wider, and the darkness began to resolve into shapes. But it took time, as if her brain were reluctant to name what it was seeing. Moonlight fell through a lattice of metal above her. Not a ceiling, a structure. She was lying on old wooden boards dusted with grit and damp. Something sticky clung faintly to her sleeve when she shifted, and she swallowed down the urge to look at it too closely. A ride platform. She turned her head and smelled the air. Rust, rot, old oil, and beneath all of it, impossibly, the sugary ghost of cotton candy. Her stomach dropped. A creaking sound echoed across the night, slow, rhythmic, not footsteps, something larger. Violet's breath came shallow as she tracked the sound upward. A Ferris wheel loomed overhead, frozen mid-rotation, its cabins hanging like empty rib cages. The wind nudged it just enough to make it groan. A sound that carried too far in the quiet. She wasn't in the city. She wasn't anywhere safe. Footsteps approached, unhurried, measured. Violet closed her eyes for a fraction of a second and counted her breaths. Not to calm herself, but to anchor. Panic blurred edges. She needed edges sharp. The footsteps stopped. A shadow fell across her face. "Welcome back," a familiar voice said softly. Violet opened her eyes. Adrian stood at the edge of the platform, hands loose at his sides, posture relaxed. He changed clothes, dark hoodie, dark gloves. Practical, anonymous. His face looked exactly the same as it had at dinner. That was the worst part. "You missed the transition," he added, like she'd slept through the first act of a movie. Violet swallowed, her throat scraping painfully. "Where am I?" Adrian's smile widened slightly, as if he'd been waiting for her to ask. "It used to be called Riverside Kingdom," he said. "Before the accident." He gestured out into the darkness, and her eyes adjusted enough to reveal the shape of the place. Broken rides, slumped game booths, torn banners hanging like skin from metal frames. A carousel in the distance, horses frozen mid-gallop with chipped paint and dull eyes. A funhouse facade whose grin had peeled away in strips. "I thought it was fitting," Adrian continued. "Valentine's Day, I mean. Romance is just another ride people trust too easily." Violet twisted her wrists. The zip ties cut deeper, burning. Adrian watched, not hungrily, attentively. "You drugged me," Violet said. "Yes." No apology, no denial. "You were careful," he went on. "I enjoyed that. It makes the night more interesting." Violet's pulse pounded. "What do you want?" Adrian's eyes skimmed her face as if cataloguing her expression. "I want to play," he said. The words landed softly. The meaning didn't. "I have rules," Adrian added lightly, like he was explaining a game children played in daylight. "Rules make things fair." He stepped back and opened a metal box mounted to a support beam. Inside, a flashlight, a portable speaker, neatly coiled cables. Prepared, planned. "Rule 1, Adrian said, clicking the flashlight on and pinning Violet in harsh white light. "You don't scream. Screaming is boring." He shut it off again, letting darkness fold back around her. "Rule 2, You don't run until I tell you. Violet forced her breathing down, steadying her voice. And rule 3? Adrian smiled wider. If you hide well, you earn time. Time for what? Violet asked. Adrian's gaze softened in a way that made her skin crawl. Hope. He took a few steps back, placing distance between them deliberately. I only do this once a year, he said, so it needs to be perfect. Once a year. The words lodged in Violet's mind and stayed there. Ritual, not impulse. Adrian turned his back on her. You get 30 seconds, he said. When I say run, you run. He began counting. Slowly. 30. 29. Violet didn't run. Her heart hammered, but her mind snapped into clarity. Zip ties weren't knots. They were friction problems. She shifted carefully, dragging her bound wrists along the platform boards inch by inch. 25. 24. Her fingers brushed something sharp, metal, a broken bracket protruding from the base of the ride. Jagged, rusted, half hidden beneath peeling paint. Violet angled her wrists and pressed the zip tie against it. Plastic squealed faintly. Adrian kept counting, voice calm, almost tender. 18. 17. She sawed harder, ignoring the burn as plastic bit into skin. 10. 9. The zip tie thinned. Her wrists screamed. 3. 2. The plastic snapped. Violet's hands flew free behind her back. Adrian's voice carried across the platform, warm with approval. Run. Violet surged to her feet and sprinted into the park. Sound followed her. Not footsteps, music. Thin, distorted, drifting from unseen speakers. A children's melody stretched into something barely recognizable. It didn't swell or brighten. It hovered at the edge of hearing, like it belonged to the place and had been waiting. The park wasn't silent anymore. It was active. Violet ran between game booths, breath tearing out of her chest. Stuffed prizes swayed above her, their stitched smiles catching moonlight as if they were watching her pass. She ducked behind a booth and pressed herself against the rotting wood, forcing her breathing down. Listen. The music drifted, metal creaked. Somewhere power hummed. Then something moved. At the far end of the row, a shape stepped forward. At first, Violet thought it was a mannequin. Then it tilted its head. A mascot. Oversized. Filthy. Its cartoon grin was cracked, fiberglass showing through flaking paint. One eye sagged lower than the other. It took a step, then another. Violet's body locked in place. Not from fear alone, but disbelief. The mascot lunged. Violet screamed and threw herself sideways just as padded arms grasped empty air where she'd been. The mascot crashed into the booth behind her, sending rusted metal cups clattering to the ground. It didn't chase. It just stood there, head tilted again, watching. Adrian's laughter floated through the music. That one always works, he called pleasantly. Violet ran. Not blindly this time. She ran angry. This wasn't a chase. It was theatre. And she was done being part of the set dressing. She ducked into a low building marked photo booth and slammed the door behind her. Darkness swallowed her. Then monitors flickered to life. Faces filled the screens. Women. Different ages. Different years. Some crying. Some silent. Some running. Timestamps burned into the corners like a brand. February 14th, 2016. February 14th, 2018. February 14th, 2020. Violet's knees weakened. A woman on one screen leaned toward the camera, whispering urgently, "If anyone finds this, don't listen to him. He lies about..." Static tore through the feed. Another screen lit up, showing a woman at a candlelit table. Le Jardin Rouge, the same rose, the same soft glow. Violet's stomach twisted as recognition clicked into place. Adrian's voice drifted through hidden speakers, smooth as silk. "I keep them," he said, "so I don't forget what works." Violet backed away, shaking. This wasn't trophies, it was proof. And as the monitors flickered and the park adjusted around her, light shifting, sounds cutting in and out, Violet understood something that tightened her fear into something sharper. He wasn't improvising. He was correcting. And now that she knew that, she also knew something else. He could be wrong. Violet didn't move. The room breathed. That was the only way to describe it. The low electrical hum beneath the monitors, rising and falling like lungs, the glow pulsing faintly as if the walls themselves were alive. The faces on the screens flickered, frozen between motion and memory, women suspended in moments that had not been meant to last. Violet pressed her palm against the wall to steady herself. The concrete was cold, gritty, real, good. She needed real. The first screen shifted. A woman sat in a chair bolted to the floor, shoulders drawn tight, posture rigid with restraint that wasn't visible but unmistakable. Her hair was tangled, her eyes glassy. She stared directly into the camera, lips trembling. "He said if I did everything right," the woman whispered, voice cracking, "he'd let me go." Static tore through the feed. The image snapped to another screen. A woman running. The angle was wrong. Too high, too distant. Surveillance. Her breath came in panicked gasps, audible even through the distortion. She cut left around a concession stand, just as Violet had moments earlier. Adrian's voice layered over the recording, calm and observational. "She always turns left here. Every single time." The woman turned left. The footage ended abruptly. Violet's throat tightened. She stepped closer, forcing herself not to look away. Fear begged her to shut her eyes, to retreat, to make the room smaller. She refused. Another screen lit. A woman stood inside the funhouse, mirrors fracturing her reflection into dozens of terrified versions of the same face. The strobe lights flickered erratically, revealing glimpses of panic instead of clarity. "He likes this part," the woman said hollowly. "He likes watching you try to recognize yourself." The light strobed again. The woman screamed. The feed cut. Violet swallowed hard. This wasn't memory. This was instruction. She backed away slowly, eyes scanning the room. Cables snaked along the floor, feeding power to the screens, disappearing through a doorway she hadn't yet explored. Why keep them? Why revisit them? Why refine them? Adrian's voice slipped into the space again, smooth and intimate, as if he were standing just behind her. "You're very quiet," he observed. "That usually comes later." Violet didn't answer. She followed the cables into the next room. It was smaller, darker, and unlike the viewing room, it wasn't designed for spectacle. It was designed for storage. Shelves lined the walls from floor to ceiling, stacked with cases, USB drives, DVDs, old tapes, each labeled in careful handwriting. February 14th, 2009, February 14th, 2011, February 14th, 2014. The gaps between dates made her stomach churn. Once a year, always Valentine's Day, she lifted one case at random and opened it. Inside was a handwritten note, folded neatly. Subject, comply quickly. Less interesting. She opened another. Subject resisted verbally. Good initial tension. Another. Mascot deployed too late. Adjust timing. Violet's hands shook. He wasn't remembering these women. He was refining them. A chair scraped faintly somewhere beyond the wall. Adrian moving. Violet's pulse quickened, but her mind stayed sharp. Panic wouldn't help her now. Panic was what he understood, what he expected. Think. Why once a year? Not restraint, not morality, anticipation. He needed the wait, the build, the permission the date gave him, the cultural camouflage. A night when no one questioned why someone went out and didn't come home. Ritual killers didn't act when they wanted. They acted when the story demanded it. And stories had structure, beginnings, middles, ends. Violet understood then what she represented. Not a person, a variable. She hadn't screamed when he expected her to. She hadn't frozen long enough. She hadn't begged. That was why he was still watching instead of closing in. One of the monitors behind her flickered again. A woman Violet hadn't seen yet filled the screen. She looked older than the others, tired, her hair streaked with grey, her face lined not with panic but with focus. The woman stared directly into the camera. "He's listening right now," she said calmly. "If you're seeing this, it means he made a mistake." Violet's heart kicked hard. The woman leaned closer. "He thinks control is the same as certainty," she continued. "It isn't. Control needs patterns. Certainty needs truth." She paused, then smiled faintly. "He's afraid of silence." The feed ended. The room fell quiet. Adrian's voice didn't return immediately. When it did, it was colder. "That one wasn't supposed to be there," he said. Violet felt something settle into place inside her. Not hope, strategy. "You kept her," Violet said aloud, "because she scared you." Silence stretched. Then Adrian spoke again, closer now. "She was inefficient," he said. "I don't like inefficiency." Violet almost smiled. That was the lie. Inefficiency wasn't the problem. Unpredictability was. She moved quietly back into the hallway, following sound instead of sight now, letting the building swallow her steps. She pressed herself against the wall as Adrian passed the doorway, his shadow stretching long across the floor. He didn't see her. For the first time all night, Adrian didn't see her. Violet closed her eyes briefly, letting that realization settle. He was still hunting, but he was also searching. And searching meant doubt. She moved again, not toward an exit, not toward safety, toward the center of the park, toward wherever he believed was his, because that was where he would be weakest. And as Violet walked, one truth anchored her completely. Adrian didn't need fear. He needed confirmation, and she was done giving it to him. The park learned a new rhythm. Violet felt it before she understood it. A subtle dissonance between sound and movement, light and expectation. The machinery still hummed, but not in time. Pauses stretched to where cues should have landed. The space between noises grew longer, unfamiliar. Adrian had stopped narrating. That, more than anything else, unsettled the night. He liked feedback. He liked reactions. Silence meant guessing, and guessing made people sloppy. Violet slowed her pace until her steps barely disturbed the gravel. She kept close to walls and dead booths, letting shadows swallow her shape. She resisted the urge to check behind her too often. Every glance backward invited pursuit. She wanted him to wander. She crossed an open stretch deliberately, letting her silhouette spill into the floodlights. Not running, not hiding, just present enough to be seen. Then she vanished again. She counted under her breath as she moved. 1, 2, 3. The music cut off, not faded. Cut. Speakers clicked, startled. Good. Violet slipped into the skeletal remains of a concession stand and waited. The wood beneath her shoes sighed. Her breathing stayed slow, controlled. Somewhere, a door slammed, Not hard, but angry. Adrian had moved. She went the other way. The funhouse loomed ahead, its cracked grin peeled and flaking. The entrance, a mouth that had learned too many secrets. Mirrors inside caught stray light and fractured it, scattering reflections across walls and floor. Violet stopped at the threshold. This was where he expected hesitation. This was where others had paused. She stepped inside. The mirrors swallowed her. Reflections multiplied. Violet running, Violet frozen, Violet screaming with a mouth she did not open. Strobe lights flickered weakly out of sync, revealing slices instead of clarity. Violet walked. Slow. Deliberate. Her footsteps echoed back from every direction, distorted and misleading. She pressed her palms against a mirror, cold, solid, real. The strobe flashed. Adrian stood behind her. Not in reality, in reflection. She didn't turn. She waited. The reflection stepped forward. The knife glinted, a dark extension of his hand. "You always come here," his voice said, close and wrong. "Everyone does." Violet exhaled. "No," she said quietly. "They came because you herded them." The strobe died. Darkness collapsed. Violet moved. She slid sideways between mirrors just as the blade sliced through where her throat had been a heartbeat earlier. Glass shattered. A mirror burst into glittering fragments. Adrian cursed, sharp, involuntary. Violet ran, but not blindly. She doubled back, slipped low, vanished through panels he'd already dismissed. The funhouse betrayed him now. Every reflection lied. His breathing sharpened. His steps grew faster. Noise. Too much noise. Violet burst through the rear exit and didn't slow. She followed the cables. Dark lines stitched along the backs of buildings, disappearing into conduit boxes and utility shafts. She tracked them like breadcrumbs, letting them lead her instead of fear. Every system had a heart. Every heart had a cage. The administration building rose ahead, squat and unremarkable, ignored by everything decorative. A place no one went unless they had to. Adrian's voice returned then, not playful, not amused. "You're changing the order," he said. Violet smiled. "That's the point." She smashed a window with a rock she didn't remember picking up and climbed through, glass biting into her palm. Pain flared, bright and grounding. Inside smelled like dust and neglect. The corridor stretched ahead, lined with curling notices and old maintenance logs. She didn't linger. At the end of the hall, a metal door waited, plain, important. A keypad glowed faintly beside it. Violet paused, not to think, but to listen. Footsteps echoed somewhere behind her, faster now, less controlled. She entered the code. The lock disengaged with a soft click. Violet slipped inside and shut the door behind her. The room hummed alive. Monitors lined the walls stacked unevenly, each showing a different angle of the park, paths, blind spots, rides frozen mid-motion. Violet saw herself on one screen, already outdated by seconds. She moved to the console and laid her hands on it. The switches were worn smooth, loved. She flipped the floodlights on full. White light erupted across the park. Shadows vanished. Hiding places died instantly. She cut the speakers. Silence slammed down. She killed auxiliary power to half the systems and watched the monitors go black in uneven patches. The park stuttered. Somewhere beyond the walls, Adrian shouted. Not words, just sound. Violet picked up the microphone. "You like to watch," she said evenly. "So watch this." She switched the feed. The central monitor filled with Adrian's image, caught mid-stride, blinking against sudden brightness, knife visible in his hand. For the first time all night, Adrian wasn't controlling the frame. He was trapped inside it. "This isn't part of the game," his voice came thinly through the room. Violet leaned back in the chair. "No," she said. "It's the part you never rehearsed." She set the microphone down and stood. The park no longer felt like his. It felt unfinished. She exited through the back stairwell and stepped into the cold again, walking now, not running. She left one path lit, a narrow ribbon of light leading toward the lake, toward the dock, toward the ending he'd written so many times before. Only now, it wasn't his story anymore. And he knew it. The lake waited. It lay beyond the last stretch of broken rides, a flat black surface that swallowed light instead of reflecting it. No ripples, no wind, just depth, the kind that suggested permanence. Violet followed the narrow ribbon of illumination she had left behind on purpose. Each floodlight hummed faintly as she passed, the sound steady and mechanical, indifferent to what had happened here before. The dock extended from the shoreline like a thought she couldn't quite push away. Old boards, warped edges, a railing that leaned instead of stood. She stepped onto it and felt the wood shift beneath her weight. Good. She adjusted her footing, moving slower now, distributing pressure the way she'd learned to do unconsciously. The way people do when they know the ground can betray them. Behind her, the park stood exposed. No music, no voices, no cues. Only metal, light and waiting. Footsteps sounded on gravel. Violet didn't turn. "You always come back here," Adrian said. His voice wasn't amplified now. It didn't glide through speakers or wrap itself in charm. It carried naturally across the open space, roughened by cold and strain. Violet reached the end of the dock and stopped just short of the operator's booth. The door hung slightly ajar, warped from years of neglect. Inside, the chair sat empty, its restraints removed long ago, but its presence unmistakable. A place designed to hold people still. She turned. Adrian stood at the shoreline, just inside the floodlights. Water dripped from his clothes where he'd already slipped once, darkening the gravel beneath his feet. Blood streaked his temple. His jacket hung wrong on one shoulder. The knife was still in his hand, but it no longer looked ceremonial. It looked necessary. "You ruined something beautiful tonight," he said. Violet met his gaze. "You keep calling it beautiful," she replied. "Like that makes it yours." Adrian stepped onto the dock. The boards creaked in protest. He paused, not because he was afraid, but because he was calculating. "You think understanding me changes anything?" he asked. They all thought they were different too. Violet shook her head. "No," she said. "They thought you were." Something flickered across his face. Confusion, sharp and fleeting. "You watched them," Violet continued. "You recorded them. You edited them. But you never listened. Not really." She took one step closer. "You needed them to behave the way you expected, to confirm what you already believed." Adrian's grip tightened on the knife. "You're talking too much," he said. "Because you're listening now," Violet replied. He lunged. It wasn't graceful. It wasn't rehearsed. It was desperation. Violet moved sideways, letting momentum betray him. Adrian's foot struck a weakened board and punched through the dock with a sharp crack. He fell forward with a shout. Not into the water, but close enough that the lake sprayed cold against his face. The knife skittered from his hand and vanished between planks, swallowed by black water. Adrian froze. Slowly, he looked down at the empty space where the blade had been. Then he looked up at Violet, and for the first time all night, He wasn't performing. "You don't get to leave," he said hoarsely. "You don't get to end it like this." Violet stepped back. "I'm not ending anything," she said. "I'm leaving." Adrian clawed at the dock, hauling himself upright. His movements were slower now, uneven. Water streamed from his clothes. His breath came ragged. He took another step. The dock answered with a groan. Violet reached for the old control lever mounted to the railing. A remnant from when the park still pretended to function. She yanked it hard. Metal screamed. Something beneath the dock shifted violently. The outer planks lurched. Adrian shouted as his footing disappeared. The dock collapsed beneath him with a sound like a breaking rib. He plunged into the lake. The water swallowed his cry instantly. Violet stood at the edge and watched the surface churn. Bubbles breaking, ripples spreading outward, then fading. A hand broke the surface, then another. Adrian dragged himself back onto the dock, coughing, soaked, shaking violently as he collapsed against the boards. He didn't rise again. Not yet. Violet didn't wait. She turned and ran. Not blindly, not in terror, but with urgency now, with purpose. Toward the perimeter, toward the gate. Behind her, Adrian shouted her name. Not amused, not commanding, afraid. Violet didn't answer. The building didn't look important. That was the mistake everyone made. It sat beyond the fun house and behind the arcade stalls, a squat concrete structure half hidden by dead shrubs and peeling paint. No color, no theme, no attempt at charm. Just a rectangle of neglect with narrow windows that reflected nothing back. Administrative, invisible. Violet slowed as she approached, every sense tuned to absence. No music leaked from here, no lights flickered. The hum beneath her feet deepened, steadier, more concentrated. This was where the park thought. She slipped around the back and found a window already cracked, glass spiderwebbed from a previous impact. Someone desperate had been here before her, someone who hadn't gotten out. Violet hooked her fingers into the fracture and pulled. The glass snapped free with a sharp crack, slicing her palm. Pain bloomed bright and immediate, grounding her in the moment. She welcomed it. She climbed through and dropped inside. The hallway smelled like damp paper and rust. Old carpet sagged beneath her shoes, softened by years of rot. Bulletin boards lined the walls, notices curling and yellowed, safety protocol, updates, seasonal staffing right, maintenance logs. The past lived here, the kind of past that didn't expect witnesses. Violet moved slowly, listening for breath that wasn't hers. At the end of the hall stood a metal door, unmarked, plain, important. She didn't touch it immediately. She leaned in, pressing her ear to the surface. A hum vibrated through the steel, electric, alive. Her pulse quickened. To the right of the door, a keypad glowed faintly. 4 digits. Violet exhaled and thought like him. Once a year. Valentine's Day. Ritual. The accident. He'd mentioned it casually, like an afterthought. Closed since the accident. Parks didn't close forever over nothing. She tried 0214. The keypad chirped angrily. Red. She tried 1402. Red again. Her heartbeat thudded harder now. Not fear, but time pressing in. Adrian wouldn't choose something obvious. He didn't want convenience. He wanted meaning. Violet pictured the video timestamps burned into the corners of the screens. February 14th, different years, always the same day. She entered a year instead. The keypad went silent. Then, green. The lock clicked. Violet pushed the door open and stepped inside. The control room hummed alive. Monitors lined 3 walls, stacked unevenly, glowing with grainy black and white feeds of the park. Every path, every blind corner, every place Violet had been, and several she hadn't. A chair sat centered before the screens, worn smooth, occupied recently. Cables snaked across the floor like veins. A control panel stretched beneath the monitors, switches labeled in faded marker, carousel funhouse. Light speaker, system security, floods, power. Violet felt something cold open in her chest. This wasn't improvisation. This was rehearsal. A desk sat in the corner. On it, notebooks, diagrams, park maps annotated in careful handwriting. Notes crowded the margins. Too fast. Better lighting here. Pause longer before reveal. Mascot works best before exhaustion. He had reviewed this, edited it, perfected it. A monitor flickered on directly in front of her. Adrian's face filled the screen. Not live. Recorded. He smiled the same way he had at dinner. "If you're watching this," the recording said, "it means you're cleverer than most." Violet didn't look away. "I admire that," Adrian continued. "But clever women always make the same mistake." The screen split. Footage appeared beside him. A woman Violet recognized from the earlier videos, her face streaked with tears, eyes hollow. "She thought understanding me would save her," Adrian said calmly. It didn't. The screen went black. Static hissed. Then, a live feed snapped on. Violet froze. The camera angle was low. Behind her, she turned. The door was still closed, unlocked now. Her reflection stared back from the dark glass. Adrian's voice filled the room, not from the screen this time, from the speakers. "You found my favorite room," he said. His tone wasn't amused. It wasn't gentle. It was curious. "You know what this is?" Adrian continued. "This is where the game becomes honest." Violet stepped toward the console. The switches were warm, used. She flipped security floods. Outside, light detonated across the park. Every hiding place vanished at once. Adrian cursed, sharp, involuntary. Violet flipped speaker system. The park fell silent. No music, no voice, just wind and metal and breathing. Then she hit AUX power. Monitors flickered. Half the screens went dark. The hum faltered. Adrian's voice returned, closer now. "You don't know what you're doing," he said. Violet smiled. "I know exactly what I'm doing." She picked up the microphone. Her voice rolled out across the park, clear and unafraid. "You like to watch," she said. "So watch this." She switched the feed. The central monitor filled with Adrian's image, caught mid-step beneath the floodlights, knife visible in his hand. For the first time all night, Adrian was on display. Silence followed. Then something new entered his voice. Uncertainty. "That isn't part of the game," Adrian said. Violet leaned back in the chair. "No," she replied. "It's the part you never planned for." She set the microphone down and stood. The park no longer belonged to him. It felt unfinished, and Adrian felt it too. Violet exited through the back stairwell and stepped into the cold again. She didn't run. She walked. She followed the single path she'd left illuminated, toward the lake, toward the dock, toward the ending he had written so many times before. Only now, it wasn't his story anymore. The gate looked ordinary. That was what almost fooled her. It stood at the far edge of the park, half hidden by scrub and skeletal trees, its metal bars dulled by rust, its hinges sagging as if time alone had weakened them. Beyond it lay darkness unbroken by floodlights, woods, road, anything that was not this place. Outside, Violet staggered toward it, lungs burning, legs trembling from cold and impact, and exhaustion layered on top of one another like debts coming due. Behind her, the lake had gone still again. The dog groaned once, then settled into silence. She didn't look back. She had learned that lesson. Her ankle throbbed from the sprint, her breath tearing sharp and shallow from her chest. Blood cooled along her collarbone where the blade had grazed her earlier, sticky against her skin. She tasted iron every time she swallowed. The gate loomed closer, real, solid, unlocked. Relief surged, sudden and dangerous. Violet slowed herself deliberately. Don't rush the ending. Adrian rushed. That was why he was coughing lake water behind her now. She reached the gate and wrapped her fingers around the cold metal bar. It moved. She pushed. The gate creaked open with a sound that felt far too loud in the night. Hope hit her hard enough to make her knees wobble. Then something snagged. Pain flared at her ankle, sharp, immediate. Violet looked down just as the wire went taut. Her foot yanked backward. The ground vanished beneath her. She fell, not far, but hard. Her body slammed into packed earth, breath exploding from her lungs in a helpless gasp. For a moment, sound disappeared entirely, replaced by a hollow ringing that swallowed the night. She lay stunned, staring up at the jagged lip of the ground above her. A concealed maintenance pit. Not deep enough to kill, deep enough to trap. Her ankle screamed where the wire bit into skin, already torn and bleeding. She tried to move and hissed as pain shot up her leg, hot and nauseating. Of course he had planned for this. A laugh tore out of her, short, cracked, unfamiliar. From above, footsteps approached, slow, careful again. Adrian's silhouette appeared at the edge of the pit, framed by floodlight and shadow. He looked ruined, soaked, shivering, one side of his face already swelling purple and red. Blood matted his hair at the temple. His jacket hung heavy and crooked, water dripping steadily from its hem. But his eyes were alive again, bright, focused, satisfied. "There you are," Adrian said hoarsely. "I was wondering if you'd miss it." Violet forced herself upright, bracing one hand against the dirt wall. Her chest burned with every breath, but her mind stayed clear. "This was your favorite part," she said. Adrian smiled. "Everyone thinks the escape matters most," he replied. "But it's the moment right after, when they think it's over." He crouched at the edge of the pit, careful not to put his weight anywhere unstable. "I build for hope," he continued. "Hope makes people careless." Violet wiped blood from her mouth with the back of her hand. "You didn't build for me," she said. Adrian's smile tightened. "You're in a hole," he said. "I built exactly for you." He leaned closer. "You're exhausted, hurt, and you can't climb out without help." Violet met his gaze. "You don't help people," she said. Adrian tilted his head. "No," he agreed. "I end them." He rose slowly, rolling his injured shoulder as if testing it. Without the knife, his movements were clumsier now, less fluid. "You're going to stay there," he said, "and I'm going to fix what you broke." He stepped back from the pit. That was the moment Violet had been waiting for. "Adrian," she said softly. He paused, not because of her tone, because of her timing. "You said you only do this once a year," Violet continued, "because it has to be perfect." Adrian turned. "Yes. And you record everything," she said, "because you don't trust memory." His eyes narrowed. Violet lifted her hand and pointed, behind him. Adrian followed her gaze instinctively. A red light blinked on the gatepost, small, steady, recording. His breath hitched. "You turned the cameras back on," he said. "No," Violet replied. I never turned them off. The realization crept across his face slowly, horribly. You came to finish this, Violet said, which means you walked straight into your own frame. Adrian lunged for the camera, and the wire at Violet's ankle went slack. She yanked hard. The tension snapped free, not the trap but the counterweight. The wire wasn't just a snare. It was part of a pulley system. Old, rusted, forgotten. The gate lurched. The pit edge collapsed inward. Adrian stumbled backward as the ground betrayed him, his injured leg failing to catch. He fell hard onto the gravel path, landing badly on his side. He screamed then, not theatrically, involuntarily. Violet didn't wait. She hauled herself upward, ignoring the agony in her ankle, fingers digging into dirt and rusted metal. Pain roared through her body, but she used it, every spike sharpening her focus. She rolled out of the pit and staggered through the gate. Adrian lay where he'd fallen, gasping, clawing uselessly at the ground. Violet stepped back into the trees beyond the fence. Freedom didn't feel triumphant. It felt cold, empty, real. Behind her, Adrian shouted her name, not angry, not commanding, afraid. Violet didn't answer. She disappeared into the dark as sirens began to bleed faintly into the distance. Not close yet, but coming. The park had one last trap, and it had failed. Sirens reached the park slowly. They didn't rush in the way Violet had expected them to. They arrived cautiously, their sound weaving through the trees and over rusted metal, rising and falling, as if even they were unsure what waited for them beyond the gates. Red and blue light bled through the branches, fractured by trunks and twisted fencing, never quite settling on anything solid. Violet stood at the edge of the woods and watched until the noise felt real enough to trust. Only then did she sit. Her ankle throbbed in deep, nauseating waves. Blood had soaked through her sock, stiffening as it cooled. Her hands shook now that there was nothing left to do, no next move to calculate. Shock crept in where strategy had been, quiet and insistent. She wrapped her arms around herself and waited. They found Adrian first. He was sitting on the ground near the administration building, wrapped in a thermal blanket that looked too small for him now. Mud streaked his clothes. His hair clung to his forehead in damp, uneven curls. One eye was already swelling shut. His hands were cuffed in front of him, wrists red and raw. He stared straight ahead, not at the officers moving around him, not at the lights, not at the park he had curated so carefully, at nothing. When they spoke to him, he didn't respond. When they lifted his chin to check his injuries, his gaze flickered once, unfocused, then slid away again. It was as if the part of him that knew how to perform had simply stopped. They didn't have to search hard. The park gave itself up easily once people knew how to look. Monitors flickered back on under police hands, showing angles and recordings that hadn't been meant for witnesses. Timestamps repeated like a chant. February 14th, year after year. The same paths, the same pauses, the same mistakes. They found the tapes, the notebooks, the annotations. They found the pit near the gate, the wire still slack against the dirt. The police system frozen mid-failure like a diagram interrupted. They found the dock, collapsed in on itself, boards broken where someone had trusted them once too often. And they found the chairs, bolted to floors in places no one had ever meant to visit again. Violet gave her statement at dawn. She sat on the back of an ambulance with a blanket around her shoulders and a paper cup of coffee she didn't drink. An EMT wrapped her ankle carefully, murmuring reassurance, in a voice that sounded practiced but kind. A detective crouched in front of her, notebook balanced on his knee. "Can you tell me how you got out?" he asked gently. Violet considered the question. She thought about the videos, the silence, the way Adrian had needed her fear to complete the shape of the night. She shook her head once. "He didn't plan for me," she said. The detective paused. "What do you mean?" "He planned for reactions," Violet replied. "Patterns, predictable things. I stopped giving him those." She met the detective's eyes then, steady despite the tremor in her hands. "He needed me to be afraid," she said. "I stopped giving him that." The detective wrote it down carefully, as if the words mattered more than they seemed. They closed the park before the sun finished rising. Yellow tape caught on broken railings and sagging gates, fluttering uselessly in the breeze. The rides stood frozen where they had been for years, finally stripped of the last illusion that they were waiting for something to begin. News vans arrived later. Questions followed. Violet didn't stay for any of it. Her sister came and took her home. They sat together in silence while the sky outside the car shifted from grey to pale blue, then to the soft gold of morning. Neither of them spoke. Some things didn't need sound. Valentine's Day came again the following year. Restaurants filled, roses sold out. Couples leaned toward each other in candlelight and told themselves familiar stories about love and timing and being chosen. The park remained closed, its fences rusted, its paint peeled. The music never returned. In an evidence room somewhere, screens stayed dark. No footage waited to be reviewed. No pattern begged to be refined. There was no performance, no ritual, no ending written in advance, only silence. And that silence, Violet would later realize, was the most frightening thing Adrian had ever lost. Because for the first time, the story didn't belong to him. It never had. End of the Heartbreak. King outro. Madness and Macabre. The park never reopened. No effort was made to save it, restore it, or pretend it could be anything other than what it had become. The rides rusted in place, the gates stayed locked, and whatever echoes once lived there were left to fade on their own. Adrian never spoke publicly about what happened that night. In interviews, in court, in the quiet moments where stories usually leak out, there was nothing. No justification, no explanation, no performance, only silence. Because silence was the one thing he never learned how to control. And Violet didn't defeat him with strength or luck or violence. She defeated him by refusing to be predictable, by refusing to be afraid in the way he needed. If there's one thing stories like this remind us, it's this. Danger doesn't always look dangerous. Sometimes it looks charming. Sometimes it looks patient. And sometimes it looks like someone who waited for the perfect night. Thank you for listening to Madness and Macabre. If you found this story unsettling, share it with someone you trust. And remember, not every invitation is an opportunity. Some of them are a test. Until next time, stay curious and stay safe.
Madness and Macabre.